Have you ever felt like you're in a moment of calm, a period where everything seems still on the surface, but deep down you sense something huge is stirring, shifting, getting ready?
Yeah, like a quiet tension.
Exactly, that subtle, almost hidden feeling like a silent tremor, an inkling that even though life looks totally ordinary, something massive is about to happen, something you can't quite put your finger on.
That exact feeling, that sense of quiet but intense preparation, that's precisely what we're going to dive into today on the deep dive. Welcome, everyone.
And welcome. This is a bit special because today, we, as the authors of In the Fullness of Time, a year-by-year journey toward the Christ, get to be your guest hosts right here on Our True Identity, the podcast.
It's great to be here. And our mission, as always on the deep dive, is to take complex stuff, history, theology, and really distill it down. We want to give you, our listener, those key nuggets of knowledge so you can feel truly well-informed. And this dive, like all of them, is really tailored for you and your journey of understanding.
Absolutely. And today, we're taking a fascinating trip back in time. Not to a year packed with, big battles or famous pronouncements. No, we're looking at a year that honestly probably felt completely ordinary to most people living then, 11 BC.
That's right. We're drawing heavily from chapter 4 of our book, In the Fullness of Time, which really zeroes in on this specific, often overlooked period.
And the title of that chapter gives us our theme today, The Silent Tremor, World Awaits Christ.
Exactly. The core idea is how this seemingly stable, almost unremarkable year, 11 BC, was actually invisibly but meticulously preparing the world, setting the stage to receive something it didn't even consciously know it needed so desperately, the Christ.
It really speaks to those unseen forces, doesn't it? That divine orchestration happening just beneath the surface, totally missed by most people at the time.
Completely missed. So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack those subtle shifts, those almost imperceptible changes happening across the globe.
We'll look at the Roman Empire, seemingly at its peak. We'll delve into Israel with all its longing and its deep divisions.
And we'll even look at the quiet, ordinary lives of individuals. We want to reveal how the stage was being set piece by piece for divine arrival that would just shatter all human expectations.
Okay, let's unpack this. Where do we start? Rome.
Let's start with Rome, because in 11 BC, Rome was the story, at least outwardly. It really stood as the absolute zenith of human power, human ambition.
It projected this image of total stability, right?
Yeah.
Unwavering order, unrivaled dominance.
Oh, completely. It saw itself as the center of the known world, no question. Its dominions stretched across continents, its legions seemed invincible, and the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, well, it was enforced with an iron fist.
Yeah.
It's hard for us to even grasp that level of perceived power today.
But right at the heart of all that power was the Emperor Augustus. Now, 11 BC is significant because it was the first full year after he'd kind of cemented his authority in a new way, wasn't it?
Precisely. He wasn't just princeps anymore, that rather modest title meaning first among equals. The really crucial step happened the year before, in 12 BC, when he also became Pontifex Maximus.
The chief priest of the Roman religion.
Exactly, and that completed this fusion, this concentration of both supreme political and supreme religious power into one person. It was a masterful move strategically.
So 11 BC is when we started seeing the real practical effects of that fusion playing out across the empire.
That's right. This wasn't just a symbolic title change. In 11 BC, this unified authority started to manifest very concretely. It wasn't just an abstract idea anymore. It was being woven into the very fabric of daily life for everyone under Roman rule.
The emperor wasn't just a ruler then. He was becoming something more. A divine figure.
In essence, yes. A mediator between the gods and humanity. And this leads directly to the really quite deliberate spread of the imperial cult.
Okay, so what did that look like for the average person living in, say, Rome or even a province?
Well, think about it. Festivals in Augustus's honor weren't just occasional holidays. They exploded in number and importance, becoming these huge public spectacles. You had things like the Ludis Seculares, these massive games meant to celebrate the dawn of a new golden age, explicitly linking Augustus himself to divine favor and Rome's destiny.
Wow, so it's not subtle.
Not at all. And his name wasn't just mentioned in official documents. It was invoked, almost like a prayer, in temples, often right alongside the traditional Roman gods. His image, his face on coins, statues everywhere wasn't just representational. It was carried in grand public processions, almost like a religious icon.
So loyalty to Caesar, to the emperor, It shifts from just being, civic duty.
To becoming a spiritual devotion, a form of worship, really.
That's a huge shift.
It is. And what's fascinating is how it spread. Yes, there were decrees, laws from the top down, but the real power of the cult grew through repetition.
Repetition. How so?
Through those small, everyday acts of reverence, maybe offering a pinch of incense at a local shrine to the emperor's genius or spirit, mentioning his name in oaths, just seeing his image constantly. These things slowly, steadily shaped people's imagination.
So they start to internalize this idea.
That salvation, security, prosperity, it all came from the state, embodied in Augustus. He was positioned, subtly but powerfully, as the mediator of divine favor, the bringer of peace. It was like this constant, low-level conditioning permeating everything.
Just try to imagine that. Your daily life, completely infused with devotion to a human ruler. You wake up, the coin you use for bread has his face, maybe with some divine symbol.
Yeah.
You walk through the forum, past shrines to him. Public announcements invoke his name. The calendar itself is marked by his deeds.
Every little thing, every mundane act, every public gathering, it subtly reinforced this idea. Augustus is the source of all good. He's the cornerstone. It was this incredibly comprehensive, human-made religion designed to center everything on one man and the state he represented.
A massive human effort to create meaning and order.
Huge. But here's the really profound contrast, almost chilling when you think about it. Despite this immense spectacle, this empire-wide system of human-made religion, all the marble temples, the oaths, the processions, heaven remained completely unmoved by it.
Unmoved.
Yeah.
Meaning no divine response.
Yeah.
No validation.
None whatsoever. According to the perspective we're exploring from the scriptures, the true plan of redemption, the real story unfolding, just advanced in silence. It was totally undistracted by the noise of Rome, the imperial pronouncements, the glitter of these man-made gods.
So God's plan wasn't interacting with this imperial cult at all. It was just elsewhere.
It seems so. It's as if the divine intention actively bypassed these grand human efforts. There weren't even subtle counter-narratives within Rome that the Romans themselves would have recognized as divine pushback. The real action was simply happening on a different plane, focused elsewhere.
That contrast is really stark. The world's greatest power pouring everything into its own religion, its own path to salvation. And meanwhile, the actual divine plan just proceeds quietly, unseen, undisturbed. Like listening to a different frequency entirely.
Exactly. And while Rome was so busy building its empire of man, completely absorbed in its own glory, a very different kind of preparation was unfolding in a remote, often overlooked corner of that same empire, in a land still considered holy by its people.
A quiet preparation.
Quiet, humble, largely unseen by the world's historians, but from this perspective, infinitely more significant.
Which brings us then to Israel. A land, as you said, of deep longing, but also profoundly divided.
Profoundly. If you looked at Jerusalem in 11 BC, the absolute standout feature, the thing that would take your breath away, was Herod's temple.
Herod the Great's massive rebuilding project.
Yes. It literally stood taller than ever. He'd expanded the courtyards, added colonnades, used the finest materials, dazzling gold, gleaming white marble. Pilgrims coming from all over the known world were just awestruck by its sheer scale and splendor. It was
A
magnificent.
testament to human craftsmanship and maybe Herod's ego too?
Both, probably.
Yeah.
And inside, the priests performed their duties with incredible precision. The rituals handed down for centuries, burning incense, offering sacrifices, the sprinkling of blood, the pronouncements of blessings, all done meticulously. The outward forms were perfect.
But there's a but coming, isn't there?
There is, because the critical, poignant detail, the thing that underscored the deep longing, was at the very heart of that magnificent temple, the Holy of Holies, remained empty. Empty. It had been centuries since the Ark of the Covenant, the tangible symbol of God's presence, had been there. Centuries since the Shekinah, the visible glory of the Lord, had dwelt among his people. So you had this profound spiritual void right at the core of their worship.
Wow. That's a powerful paradox. A place so outwardly stunning, so ritually correct, but lacking its very essence, its reason for being, in a way.
Exactly. And yet, the people still came. Faithfully, year after year, not because they felt God's presence tangibly stirring, but because of the promise, the ancient promise that one day he would return. It was a temple built on hope, really, a monument waiting for the very presence it was designed to house.
That must have just intensified their longing, their anticipation.
It absolutely did. And that hope, that persistent longing, wasn't just wishful thinking. It was constantly fueled by the scriptures themselves.
The prophecies.
Yes. Among the truly faithful, there was this growing, almost gut feeling that the silence, this apparent divine absence, couldn't last forever. The prophecies they heard read every week in the synagogues across the land were filled with unfulfilled promises. And these weren't just old stories, they felt alive, relevant.
Like Isaiah.
Exactly. Isaiah speaking of a virgin bearing a child who would be called Emmanuel, God with us. Or Micah, who specifically named tiny Bethlehem as the birthplace of a future ruler.
And Daniel too, right? With those cryptic timelines.
Yes, Daniel's 70 weeks. A complex prophecy, but many scholars at the time were intensely studying it, interpreting it as a kind of divine countdown to the Messiah's arrival, the time of deliverance.
So these ancient texts weren't just history lessons. They were living words, feeding this fervent expectation that something had to happen soon.
They were absolute fuel for that longing, especially living under Roman occupation and seeing the corruption within their own leadership structures. These prophecies constantly reminded them, God made promises? Those promises haven't been fulfilled yet. It created this atmosphere of eager, maybe sometimes desperate, anticipation.
But you mentioned divisions. Despite this shared longing, the religious leadership wasn't exactly unified, were they?
Not even close. There were deep, deep divisions. Each major group was interpreting the divine silence and the prophecies through its own very specific, often conflicting lens. It was a really fragmented religious landscape.
Okay, so who are the main players? You had the Sadducees.
Right. The Sadducees. They were largely the priestly aristocracy, controlling the temple and its wealth. They clung fiercely to their temporal power and, crucially, their relationship with Rome.
And they were skeptical about, well, a lot of things the other groups believed.
Very skeptical. They didn't really buy into angels or the resurrection of the dead or any kind of direct supernatural intervention that might upset the status quo. They focused almost exclusively on the written law of Moses, the first 5 books, and tended to dismiss the prophetic books that pointed beyond the temple system.
So their idea of deliverance was more about maintaining stability, keeping Rome happy.
Pretty much. Their biggest fear was rocking the boat, losing their privileged position. A miracle-working Messiah wasn't really on their agenda.
Okay. Then the Pharisees. They were different.
Very different. A much larger group, more influential among the ordinary people. They were utterly devoted to not just the written law, but also the development and preservation of the oral law, the traditions and interpretations passed down through generations.
And they believed meticulous obedience was the key.
Yes. Their core belief was that if Israel could just perfectly obey every detail of the law, both written and oral, that would trigger the arrival of God's kingdom. Their schools trained rabbis. They debated endlessly about purity rules, dietary laws, Sabbath observance, shaping daily life for many Jews.
So they expected a Messiah who would champion perfect law-keeping.
Essentially, yes. Someone who would establish a kingdom defined by righteousness through obedience to the Torah as they understood it.
And the third group, the Essenes.
The Essenes were more radical, more withdrawn. Many lived in isolated communities, like the one near the Dead Sea where the scrolls were found. They were convinced the temple in Jerusalem was hopelessly corrupt, and that the end times, a period of divine judgment, were imminent.
So they were focused on purity and preparing for
a final cosmic battle. They meticulously copied and preserved ancient scrolls, awaiting the day when they, the sons of light, would triumph over the sons of darkness, including the corrupt priesthood. They expected messianic figures, perhaps even 2, a priestly one and a kingly one, to lead them in this apocalyptic restoration.
Wow. So Sadducees wanting stability, Pharisees wanting perfect obedience, Essenes wanting apocalyptic judgment. Very different expectations.
Completely different. Each group expected something from God, filtered through their own beliefs and anxieties. But here's the crucial thing, the shared blind spot.
What was that?
None of them, not the politically savvy Sadducees, not the meticulously religious Pharisees, not the apocalyptic Essenes, truly anticipated how profoundly the actual Messiah would challenge their categories. None of them foresaw the answer coming through incarnation.
Not through war, not through reforming the priesthood, not temple politics, not even perfect law-keeping, but God actually becoming human.
Precisely. God wasn't just going to intervene within their systems, fix the politics, reform the temple, clarify the law in the ways they imagined. He was going to arrive. He wasn't just going to interpret the law, he was going to embody it. He wasn't leading a political revolt. He was starting a revolution in the human heart.
It really underscores that idea, God's ways are just not our ways. His solutions often completely subvert our expectations.
Infinitely higher. He wasn't just sending help. He was becoming one of us, a concept too radical for any of them to grasp beforehand.
And while all this religious ferment and division was bubbling away, we can't forget the man ruling Judea at the time, Herod the Great.
Ah, Herod, yes. In 11 BC, he's in the final decade of his life. And his reign, famous for those incredible building projects, was increasingly marked by just terrifying paranoia and violence.
He was known for being ruthless, wasn't he?
Extremely. He'd married into the Hasmonean royal family to legitimize his rule, but by this point he'd systematically executed most of them, including his own wife, Miriam, whom he supposedly loved, and several of his own sons. His fear of conspiracy, of being overthrown, was insatiable.
Killing rivals, rebels, even his own family.
Yes, anyone he suspected of disloyalty. And each act of violence, each betrayal, just seemed to deepen his isolation, driving him further into this dark, suspicious world. Loyalty wasn't earned. It was bought or compelled by fear.
And yet outwardly he's still building these massive projects.
It's an incredible contradiction. His architectural legacy was still growing. The amazing artificial port at Caesarea Maritima, the impregnable fortress of Masada, the imposing Antonia fortress and towers in Jerusalem, all bearing his mark, monuments to his power and ambition.
So the buildings get bigger, but the man seems to shrink.
That's a good way to put it. While his physical structures reached for immortality, his soul seemed consumed by fear and cruelty. He built as if to defy death, but he couldn't escape the whispers, the plots, the gnawing fear of losing control.
How did the people see him then? This builder king who was also a tyrant.
It was complicated. They had to respect his power. He was effective at keeping order, pleasing Rome, and building things that brought a certain prestige. But they deeply feared his cruelty, and they fundamentally mistrusted him. He was an Idumean, not fully Jewish in their eyes, and his Hellenistic ways often clashed with tradition. There was this constant tension between the splendor he created and the terror he inflicted.
Yet somehow, amidst Herod's tyranny, Roman oppression, and that long divine silence, the Jewish people kept going.
They endured, that's the word. They waited. They kept the feasts, Passover, Pentecost, Tabernacles, year after year, faithfully observing the rhythms of their covenant. Their resilience is just remarkable when you consider the pressures they faced.
Holding on to hope.
Holding on to hope, fueled by those promises. They memorized Isaiah's words about a shoot from the stump of Jesse, a promise of new life, even from a seemingly dead royal line. They taught their children, generation after generation, God hasn't forgotten us, he will act.
That collective resilience, passed down through just ordinary faithfulness, keeping Sabbath, telling the stories of Abraham, Moses, David, it's incredibly powerful.
It was a profound testament to their covenant faithfulness, even when the fulfillment seemed so far off.
And this quiet preparation, this setting of the stage, wasn't just happening in the corridors of power in Rome or the tense streets of Jerusalem. It was also unfolding in much quieter, more unassuming places.
Absolutely. We need to look at ordinary life, especially in Galilee. In the villages, there are places like Nazareth, Capernaum, Bethsaida. Life went on much as it had for centuries, seemingly untouched by the grand dramas playing out elsewhere.
What did that look like?
Families rising early, tending small fields, maybe olive groves or vineyards, drawing water from the village well, grinding grain, baking bread, the basics of life.
And faith woven into daily rhythms.
Deeply woven. Boys learning the Shema, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one," from their fathers, memorizing Torah passages. Girls learning from their mothers how to manage a household, prepare food according to kosher laws, and keep the sacred calendar, knowing when the feasts were.
The Sabbath providing that weekly pause.
A crucial rhythm of rest and worship. And the great pilgrimage feasts, Passover, celebrating deliverance from Egypt, Shavuot or Pentecost, celebrating the harvest and the giving of the law, Sukkots or tabernacles, remembering the wilderness wanderings. These marked the year. Each one was a living reminder of God's past faithfulness and implicitly a pointer towards future hope.
It's really hard to picture, isn't it? These quiet, dusty villages, lives passing completely unnoticed by Roman historians.
Yeah.
Yet this is where the prelude to the main event is really taking shape. These hills would soon hear angels sing.
Exactly. Now let's zero in on Nazareth for a moment. Consider Joseph, a Tecton, a craftsman, likely working with wood, but maybe stone or metal too. A working man.
Providing for his family.
Steadily, reliably, and it's very likely he traveled frequently for work, probably just a few miles away, to Sepphoris.
Sepphoris, why there?
Sepphoris was a major administrative center for Galilee, and Herod Antipas, Herod the Great's son, was rebuilding and expanding it after some unrest. It was a bustling city, a hub drawing craftsmen like Joseph. And crucially, it was a place where Roman and Hellenistic culture flowed much more freely than in a small village like Nazareth.
Ah, okay. So
Yeah.
Joseph, going back and forth, would have seen, well, the wider world.
He would have encountered it daily, heard foreign languages, probably Greek alongside Aramaic, seen Roman soldiers on patrol, noticed the architecture blending local styles with Roman and Greek designs. He would have felt the presence of the empire pressing into everyday life in a way you wouldn't in sleepy Nazareth.
He saw the face of Roman power and Hellenistic influence up close.
Yes. But then, each evening, he'd return home. To a simple house, a life governed not by Caesar's decrees or the latest Greek philosophies, but by the law of God, by the ancient traditions of his people.
And the key point here is,
The key is that his quiet, daily faithfulness, his integrity in his work, his devotion to God and family, his simple obedience to the Torah that was shaping the heart of the man who would soon be entrusted with protecting the Son of God from Herod the Great's murderous rage. He wasn't being prepared by dramatic visions or dreams of destiny. He was being prepared by daily faithfulness, an ordinary man being formed for an extraordinary task.
that's profound. And Mary, what about her in 11 BC?
Mary in Nazareth, probably just reaching womanhood, maybe early teens, living a life of similar quiet faithfulness, helping her mother, learning the skills she'd need, participating in village life and worship.
Our source says she was not yet called, but she was already chosen.
A beautiful phrase. Her soul was being quietly prepared, steeped in the Psalms and the stories of the matriarchs. Think about that. She knew the stories of Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Hannah, Ruth, women whose lives were marked by faith, by waiting, by unexpected divine intervention.
So she's absorbing this heritage of faith without knowing.
Without knowing the specific, unique role she would play. She waited, without knowing what she was waiting for, prepared without conscious awareness for that singular moment when the angel Gabriel would appear to her alone. A moment that would change everything.
She couldn't have known her own words would echo down through history. My soul magnifies the Lord.
Not a clue. But the crucial insight, the really moving part, is that the formation of that voice, the shaping of that faithful, receptive heart, that deep capacity for worship and surrender, it was already happening in the hidden places, in the quiet rhythm of daily obedience, prayer, reflection on Scripture.
She wasn't seen as extraordinary by her neighbors, just a girl from Nazareth.
Exactly. But in the eyes of heaven, she was already highly favored, already being uniquely prepared. It's such a powerful reminder of how God often works in obscurity, using the mundane to prepare for the miraculous.
It really is. And this persistence of Jewish life, not just in Nazareth, but across Galilee.
Yeah.
That's another vital piece, isn't it?
Absolutely vital. In towns like Capernaum, Chorazin, Bethsaida places, Jesus would later frequent Jewish life flourished. Not with political power, not with military might, but with this quiet, steady persistence, day in, day out.
Markets buzzing, synagogues active.
Right. Synagogues were centers of community life weekly, scripture readings, prayers, teaching. Fathers taught sons the law. Mothers passed down the traditions, the recipes for feast days. Yes, Roman coins were used for trade. That was the reality of occupation. But the songs of David were still sung. And it was the law of Moses, not Roman statutes, that governed the soul, the conscience.
And this quiet faithfulness, generation after generation, God noticed.
Our source emphasizes it was not lost on God. In fact, it were the very stage he chose, the rich, prepared soil into which the seed of the gospel would be planted. The Messiah wouldn't arrive in a spiritual vacuum. He'd be born into this world deeply shaped by covenant, by longing, by people who kept telling the stories, kept the faith, even when God seemed silent.
Okay, so we've seen Rome's outward power and inner emptiness, Israel's longing and division, and the quiet faithfulness in places like Galilee. What about the wider world beyond Israel? Was there a sense of searching there too?
Oh, definitely. An unconscious yearning, perhaps, and philosophical pathways were being laid unknowingly that would actually help the gospel spread later on.
How so? What was the mood outside Judea?
Well, the Roman provinces were this vast, incredibly diverse mix. You still had military campaigns on the frontiers, shifting borders, generals seeking glory, local populations trying to survive under Roman rule. In the East, places like Asia Minor, you had this amazing blend, Greek philosophy and art, Roman law and order, and deep-rooted Eastern mysticism all swirling together. It was fertile ground for new ideas.
Cities were vibrant places.
Incredibly vibrant, filled with shrines to countless gods, big libraries, theaters putting on Greek plays, bustling marketplaces with goods from all over the empire. Life had energy, color, commerce, but underneath,
Restlessness.
Restlessness. Because the old gods, the traditional Greco-Roman pantheon, Jupiter, Juno, Apollo, all the rest, they just weren't cutting it anymore for many people, especially the educated. The myths felt like, well, just myths. The rituals often felt empty, yet nothing compelling had really emerged to fill that spiritual void.
Leaving a kind of spiritual vacuum.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A vacuum people tried to fill in different ways. Philosophers debated ethics and meaning in public squares. Mystery cults, offering secret knowledge and promises of immortality, gained popularity, attracting those disillusioned with the state religion. And the poor, the vast majority, just struggled to survive, maybe finding solace in local superstitions or just hoping for a better life somehow.
It sounds like a world searching, even if it didn't know what it was searching for.
That's a great way to put it. A collective, unspoken need, a hunger they couldn't quite name.
And you mentioned intellectual developments, like in Alexandria.
Yes, Alexandria was a major intellectual crossroads, especially for Jewish thought interacting with Greek philosophy. This was quite significant.
With figures like Philo.
Exactly. Philo of Alexandria is the prime example. He and others were deeply exploring this concept of the logos
Which the Greeks saw
as the divine reason, the ordering principle behind the entire cosmos. Philo's project was fascinating. He tried to harmonize this Greek concept with Jewish revelation. He argued that the God of Abraham, the God revealed in the Torah, was perfectly compatible with the highest insights of Plato and Aristotle, that there was a universal divine logic at work.
trying to build a bridge between Hebrew faith and Hellenistic thought.
Precisely. Now, his synthesis wasn't perfect, and it wasn't inspired in scripture, but it was incredibly important preparation. It carved out an intellectual space. It created categories and vocabulary that helped prepare the minds of many educated Gentiles, people who would later hear the gospel message and find it resonated both with the ancient prophecies of Israel and with concepts familiar from Greek philosophy like the logos, which John's gospel uses so powerfully.
So even these philosophical explorations were part of the fullness of time, unknowingly paving the way.
Unknowingly, yes. It shows how God can use even human intellectual striving as part of his larger plan.
But these philosophies, like Stoicism and Epicureanism, they couldn't ultimately provide the answer people needed, could they?
No, they fell short. They offered systems, but not salvation.
Stoicism was quite influential in Rome,
Right.
right? Emphasizing self-control, duty, enduring hardship rationally.
Very influential, especially among the Roman elite. It shaped their ethics, their sense of duty, their ability to face adversity with a stiff upper lip. But it had serious limitations.
Such as?
Well, Stoicism couldn't really speak to that deep human yearning for redemption, for forgiveness, for a personal relationship with the divine. It offered no real comfort for profound grief or suffering beyond just enduring it. Its God was ultimately impersonal. Its wisdom felt cold to many. It could discipline the mind, perhaps, but it couldn't heal the heart. It was preparation, maybe, but definitely not salvation.
And the Epicure, and their focus was more on pleasure and avoiding pain.
Yes. Finding peace through maximizing pleasure, often understood simply as the absence of pain and mental disturbance, and minimizing suffering. But that philosophy, while maybe appealing in theory, just rang hollow for most people living in a world filled with unavoidable suffering, injustice, poverty, and death.
For the average person struggling to survive, avoiding pain wasn't really an option.
Not at all. Daily survival was their philosophy. They needed something much more substantial than seeking pleasure or detaching from hardship. They needed hope. They needed deliverance.
So both schools of thought, Stoicism and Epicureanism.
They could diagnose the human condition, the brokenness, pretty well, but they had no real cure. The deepest cries of the human soul for meaning, purpose, forgiveness, hope beyond the grave, they demanded more than a system. They demanded a savior. And that unspoken, unmet need just grew more desperate, more universal across the empire.
A world unknowingly crying out for something it couldn't yet name.
Precisely. And shifting our view again, way out east, beyond the Roman borders, the Magi.
Ah, the wise men, they were already watching the heavens.
They were, continuing their ancient traditions, blending astronomy with religious seeking, meticulously observing the stars, the planets, searching for signs, for meaning in the celestial movements.
And they sensed something?
Our source suggests they did. A stirring in their hearts, a feeling that the heavens were holding back a message, that something momentous was pending. Their traditions, their scrolls, spoke of celestial signs heralding great events, like the births of kings foretold in the stars.
Their understanding was maybe imperfect, blended with other ideas, but their searching was real.
Exactly. Their wisdom might have been flawed by human standards or mixed with astrology, but their hunger for truth, their spiritual yearning, was genuine. And the idea here is that this hunger was itself placed in them by the very God they didn't yet fully know. And it would be this God-given hunger that would eventually draw them westward,
Following a star.
following a star across incredible distances. It's amazing they weren't part of Israel's covenant, not Jews, but they were undeniably part of God's plan.
Positioned providentially.
Yes. Their physical journey hadn't started in 11 BC, but their hearts, tuned by the seeking, were already beginning to move, already leaning towards Judea. It shows God speaking through different cultural languages, preparing hearts far beyond the expected boundaries.
And one last piece of preparation. Those Roman roads.
Ah, yes, the roads. An incredible feat of engineering stretching further and further, connecting the vast empire, facilitating trade, military movements, communication.
Carrying goods, soldiers, messages.
And stories, languages, ideas, hopes. But what no Roman engineer or emperor foresaw, the deep divine irony,
Was that these very roads, built for imperial control and glory,
would become the highways for the apostles, the pathways for the gospel message to spread like wildfire across the empire.
wow. The system Rome built to project its own power was being repurposed.
Unwittingly repurposed for a glory far greater than Caesar's, a kingdom not of this world, whose message would travel on roads built for worldly conquest. It's a beautiful paradox of divine providence.
So putting it all together, 11 BC moves along, outwardly normal, but
Underneath, the world still felt that silence from God. But the silence, as our source describes it, now carried a different quality. A weight.
not abandonment.
No, not the weight of abandonment, but the weight of imminence, of expectation. The centuries of waiting were no longer just idle time passing. The waiting itself had become thick with purpose, pregnant with destiny.
Like the quiet before the storm, or maybe before something wonderful.
That's a good analogy. Like the pause before the curtain rises on the main act. The final, intense hush in the concert hall just before the first note rings out. The world, though almost entirely unaware, was spiritually holding its breath. The stage was set.
And in the spiritual realm, heaven itself.
Heaven was buzzing with anticipation. Angels who had witnessed so much of salvation history already were stirring, watching intently. This mission, the one fast approaching, was utterly unique.
They were going to witness.
Not just another message from God, but the mystery of God himself becoming human, the Word becoming flesh. The text says they longed to look into this profound, unprecedented event.
And the plan itself. Was it precarious? Could anything derail it?
From the divine perspective, absolutely not. The plan moved forward with perfect precision. No emperor's whim, no political upheaval, no human failing could stop it. The clock of eternity wasn't late, wasn't rushed. It moved in perfect cadence towards the moment.
The moment when time itself would pivot.
Exactly, when history would split into BC and AD, forever altered by one birth in an obscure village.
And the sheer paradox of that birth. It's almost overwhelming to think about.
It is. The Son, the eternal Word, who spoke galaxies into existence, preparing to enter the world he made, to be carried in a young woman's womb, utterly dependent.
He who holds everything together by his power, soon to be cradled in weakness.
The Creator becoming creature, the invisible becoming visible, the infinite becoming infant. It shatters every human expectation of how divine power should manifest. We expect thunder and lightning, overwhelming force.
Instead, God chooses vulnerability, humility, hiddenness.
The ultimate condescension. Not arriving as a conquering king like Caesar or a political reformer like the Zealots wanted, or even a super Pharisee, but as God himself, stepping right into the middle of our messy, broken human reality, taking on our nature to save us. The ultimate act of love.
So as 11 BC played out its final months, the world just kept going, unaware.
Completely unaware of how close they were. Life went on. Sacrifices in the temple, trade in the markets, philosophers writing, soldiers marching, slaves toiling, mothers weeping, lovers dreaming. Business as usual.
Unaware that everything was about to change forever.
Totally unaware. But heaven knew. Heaven heard the approaching footsteps of divine purpose. Heaven watched as all these threads, Roman roads, Jewish longing, philosophical searching, Galilean faithfulness converged on this hinge point of history.
And the poor, the forgotten, still asking why God hadn't come yet.
Still asking, still longing. The world felt like that cup, wasn't it described? Nearly full, trembling right at the brim, ready to overflow with something astonishing and new.
That silence of 11 BC, it wasn't empty then, it was full.
Full of purpose, full of promise, full of meaning, holding every covenant, every prophecy, every unheard cry of the human heart. The fullness of time wasn't quite complete, but the signs were louder, the stage more perfectly set than ever. The key players were moving into position, the curtain was trembling, about to rise.
So 11 BC ends, looks like any other year passes, sunsets, seasons turn.
Outwardly, yes, but heaven had marked it. Its days were recorded not just in human chronicles, but in the mind of God, woven into his unfolding eternal plan. It wasn't forgotten. No year is forgotten, no moment wasted when it moves history towards the Redeemer. It was another layer, another crucial step in the deepening of divine intention.
The soil of Israel, you said, tilled by centuries of waiting, covenant, exile. It was ready.
Receptive.
Tender and worn, perhaps, but ready. The promises felt old, distant sometimes, but they hadn't faded in God's mind. David's throne was empty politically, but not in God's redemptive plan.
So it wasn't a wasted year.
Not at all. No year is wasted in God's hands. Every moment of waiting becomes part of the miracle. Every ordinary day becomes a line in the prelude. Every unnoticed act of faithfulness, Joseph's integrity, Mary's quiet devotion, the persistence of synagogue worship becomes another brick in the road leading straight to the Christ.
And the silence.
The silence was still unbroken, but you could almost hear it vibrating. It was trembling.
Wow. So we've journeyed through 11 BC, a year that looks so quiet on the history charts, so unremarkable.
Right, devoid of those headline-grabbing events.
But as we've unpacked it, drawing from our work in the fullness of time, we see it was actually this period of intense, hidden, underlying preparation for one of history's absolute turning points.
We've seen God's intricate, often unseen work unfolding across cultures in Rome, in Israel, even among the Magi, through philosophy, through politics, and crucially, through the quiet faithfulness of ordinary lives.
It really drives home that idea that God's purposes are always moving forward, even when we can't see it, even when things seem quiet or mundane. The ordinary often holds the seeds of the extraordinary.
It certainly does. And that brings us to a final thought, a question really, for you, our listener, to take away from this deep dive.
Okay.
If a seemingly ordinary, unremarkable year like 11 BC was so profoundly packed with divine purpose, so full of unseen preparation for something world-changing, what might be stirring beneath the surface of the seemingly ordinary moments in your life right now?
That's a challenging thought. What subtle tremors might be happening in the silence of our own waiting, in the rhythms of our everyday lives, preparing us for something significant, something we don't even know we need yet, or for the next chapter in our own story with God. Something to definitely consider deeply.